The most expensive alarm event I've ever seen close up wasn't a break-in. Nobody kicked in a door, nothing was stolen. It was a water pipe in a space nobody ever walked into, in a home where everything else had been done right. I'll tell you the whole story in a minute because it's the reason this video exists. First, let's be clear about what we're talking about because the name causes confusion. When I say temperature sensor, I don't mean your thermostat. I don't mean a little Wi-Fi gadget with an app that shows you a number. I mean a sensor that connects to your alarm system, the same system watching your doors and windows, and treats a dangerous temperature the way it treats an open door, as a condition worth reporting right now to someone who can act on it. Here's the thing that makes this sensor different from almost everything else on your panel. Your door contacts, your motion detectors, your glass break sensors, even your water leak sensors, all of them report something that is already happening. A temperature sensor reports the conditions that cause the damage before the damage exists. If you saw our water leak sensor video, this is the sensor that sits upstream of everything that video covered. The water sensor catches the flood. This one catches the failure that leads to the flood while there's still time to prevent it. So what is this device? Mechanically, it's simple. It's a sensor connected to your alarm panel, exactly like the sensors we covered in our wired versus wireless video. The same rules apply. Wired versions draw power from the panel. Wireless versions run on a battery and report low battery as a signal at the panel or keypad. The sensor watches temperature at its location, and when the temperature crosses a trigger point you've set, it sends a signal to the panel. From there, that signal rides the same monitoring path we broke down in the cellular versus Wi-Fi video, out to your monitoring center or your phone, over whichever communication path your system uses. That last part is what separates this from the gadget aisle. A standalone Wi-Fi temperature gadget depends on your router, your internet, and its own little battery, and if any of those quietly fails, the gadget just stops and nothing tells you. A sensor on a professionally monitored panel is supervised. The panel expects to hear from it, and a sensor that goes quiet gets noticed. The difference matters most on exactly the day everything else is going wrong. Now for that story. A multi-million-dollar home, beautiful property, well-built, professionally secured. The mechanical equipment for part of the house lived in an attic mechanical room, and that room was unconditioned. No heat, no cooling, just equipment. At some point during a particularly bad cold stretch, a water pipe in that room froze and burst. And because it happened at the top of the house, the water didn't stay there. It came down through every level below it. By the time anyone knew, the damage ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Here's what makes that story hurt. A single temperature sensor in that room could have reported the falling temperature hours before that pipe ever froze. That's the entire value proposition of this device in one sentence. It converts a disaster into a phone call. Walk through how these failures actually unfold. Sometimes a furnace just quits while the house is empty and nothing announces it. In this case, the furnace never even stopped running. It was just so cold outside for so long that the temperature in that unconditioned attic mechanical room plummeted. Eventually, the interior reaches the point where water in the most vulnerable locations begins to freeze. Pipes in exterior walls, in crawl spaces, in unconditioned rooms like that attic. Water expands when it freezes, the pipe splits, and then the cruel part, the real damage often waits until the thaw, when water starts flowing through the break and keeps flowing until someone discovers it. Every stage of that timeline is invisible from the outside. And the people most exposed are the ones who are away the longest. Vacation homes, snowbirds who leave for entire seasons, anyone who travels weeks at a time, rental properties between tenants. If that describes your situation, this part is the whole video. Freeze protection is the headline use, but temperature cuts both directions, and the high side gets overlooked because the damage can be more quiet. Think about what happens when an air conditioner fails in a warm climate. The house doesn't flood, nothing bursts. The indoor temperature just climbs, and the humidity climbs with it. And if that condition holds for an extended period, you're growing mold. This is worth saying directly to everyone watching from somewhere warm. Even in tropical environments where a frozen pipe will never happen, a failed air conditioner in an unoccupied home can do serious, expensive, slow-motion damage. A high-temperature trigger catches that failure the same way a low trigger catches a dead furnace. And if pets stay home when you travel, a failed air conditioner becomes their problem long before it becomes the house's problem. I've installed temperature sensors with both high and low trigger points specifically to watch HVAC systems, in both directions, for exactly this reason. Heating and cooling equipment fails quietly, and an empty house gives it all the time it needs. Refrigeration is another real application. Think about the second refrigerator in the basement, or the deep freezer out in the garage, the one holding months of food that nobody opens very often. A failed compressor in one of those can go unnoticed for a long time, and everything inside it is the cost of finding out late. A temperature sensor watching that appliance turns the same quiet failure into the same early phone call. Placement starts with one question: what are you trying to protect? The sensor goes where the risk lives, and the trigger point follows from where the sensor goes. The first distinction is whether the sensor is going into a conditioned or unconditioned space. In the conditioned part of your home, the space your thermostat controls, the goal is early warning. You want to know the system has failed while you still have the most time to respond. So the trigger goes just outside the range you'd ever realistically set your thermostat to hold. If you'd never set your heat below the mid-50s, a low trigger somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees tells you something is wrong almost as soon as it's true. Compare that to a trigger set down near 40. By the time a conditioned space reads 40 degrees, your heating has been dead for a long time, and your time to act has been shrinking the whole while. The trigger point is really a decision about how much time you're giving yourself. Set it early and you might get hours you'd otherwise lose. Unconditioned spaces flip the logic. That attic mechanical room runs cold every winter by design, so a 50-degree trigger would cry wolf all season. There, the trigger sits lower, closer to where actual freeze risk begins, because the job in that space is protecting the pipe rather than watching the furnace. Same sensor, different job, different number. The same reasoning applies on the high side for spaces that normally run warm. Now the part that separates a good setup from a false sense of security. The sensor's job ends when its signal to the panel has been sent. Everything after that comes down to your plan, and the plan is something you design. Here's what most homeowners don't know. With professional monitoring, the central station's response can typically be tailored to the type of alarm signal. A burglary signal and a low temperature signal don't have to trigger the same actions, and they shouldn't. You almost certainly don't want a police dispatch because your furnace died. What you want instead is a call list. The monitoring center works down your contacts until it reaches you or someone you've designated, a neighbor, a property manager, a family member nearby, whoever can actually get eyes on the house and act. That word designated is key. If you're 1,000 miles away for the winter, the alert reaching your phone is only step one. Somebody still has to get heat restored or water shut off before the temperature keeps falling. The alert doesn't fix the furnace. Decide in advance who that person is, make sure the monitoring center has them on your call list, and make sure that person can actually get in. If you're self-monitoring instead, be honest with yourself about the same question. An alert at 2 a.m, in a different time zone, silenced on your nightstand, protects nothing. The sensor buys you time, the plan is what spends it well. So who should add temperature sensors? 3 situations cover most homes. First, homes that sit empty for long stretches, vacation properties, snowbird schedules, frequent travel, rental between occupants. Absence is the multiplier on every scenario in this video because every one of these failures does its damage in the time before discovery. If your home is regularly unoccupied, this sensor moves from optional to obvious. Second, homes with vulnerable spaces, even if someone is home every day. Plumbing in unconditioned areas, attic or crawl space mechanical rooms, equipment in spaces nobody enters for months. You can live in a house full time and still never feel what's happening in a room you don't walk through. That attic pipe would have burst whether or not the family was downstairs. Third, anyone who already owns an alarm system. If the panel is already on the wall and the monitoring path is already paid for, a temperature sensor is a modest addition riding infrastructure you already own. Compared to the cost of the event it prevents, it's one of the most lopsided value decisions in this entire category. Here's the way I'd leave it with you. Every other sensor on your system tells you about damage already in progress. This one tells you about the conditions that cause it, while you can still do something. In 20 years of installs, I've never heard a homeowner regret adding one. I have absolutely stood in a flooded home with an owner who regretted not having one. If this helped you think through your system, the wired versus wireless video and the monitoring path video are the two natural next steps, both linked below. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.